ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामिनिति नामिने। हरे कृष्ण। Reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13. We were reading verse 8 to 12 and we were on its purport. Continuing from previous video. As for detachment from children, wife, and home, it is not meant that one should not have feelings for these. They are natural objects of affection. But when they are not favorable to spiritual progress, then one should not be attached to them. The best process for making the home pleasant is Krishna consciousness. If one is in full Krishna consciousness, he can make his home very happy because this process of Krishna consciousness is very easy. One need only chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Accept the remnants of foodstuffs offered to Krishna. Have some discussion on books like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam and engage oneself in deity worship. These four things will make one happy. One should train the members of his family in this way. The family members can sit down morning and evening and chant together Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. If one can mold his family life in this way to develop Krishna consciousness, following these four principles, then there is no need to change from family life to renounced life. But if it is non-congenial, not favorable for spiritual advancement, then family life should be abandoned. One must sacrifice everything to realize or serve Krishna, just as Arjun did. Arjun did not want to kill his family members, but when he understood that these family members were impediments to his Krishna realization, he accepted the instruction of Krishna and fought and killed them. In all cases, one should be detached from the happiness and distress of family life because in this world, one can never be fully happy or fully miserable. Happiness and distress are concomitant factors of material life. One should learn to tolerate as advised in Bhagavad Gita. One can never restrict the coming and going of happiness and distress, so one should be detached from the materialistic way of life and be automatically equipoised in both cases. Generally, when we get something desirable, we are happy, and when we get something undesirable, we are distressed. But if we are actually in the spiritual position, these things will not agitate us. To reach that stage, we have to practice unbreakable devotional service. Devotional service to Krishna without deviation means engaging oneself in the 9 processes of devotional service, which are chanting, hearing, worshipping, offering respect, etc. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Vandanam, Archanam, Dasyam, Sakhyam, Atmanivedanam. As described in the last verse of 9th chapter, that process should be followed. Naturally, when one is adapted to the spiritual way of life, he will not want to mix with the materialistic man. That would go against his grain. One may test himself by seeing how far he is inclined to live in a solitary place without unwanted association. Naturally, a devotee has no taste for unnecessary sporting or cinema going or enjoying some social function because he understands that these are simply a waste of time. There are many research scholars and philosophers who study sex life or some other subject, but according to Bhagavad Gita, such research work and philosophical speculation has no value. That is more or less nonsensical. According to Bhagavad Gita, one should make research by philosophical discretion into the nature of the soul. One should make research to understand the self that is recommended here. As far as self-realization is concerned, it is clearly stated here that the Bhakti Yoga is especially practical. As soon as there is a question of devotion, one must consider the relationship between super soul and the individual soul. The individual soul and the super soul cannot be one, at least not in bhakti conception, the devotional conception of life. This service of the individual soul to the super soul, supreme soul is eternal, nityam, as it is clearly stated. So, bhakti or devotional service is eternal. One should be established in that philosophical conviction. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 2, verse 11, that is explained. Vadanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yad jnanam advayam brahma iti paramatma iti bhagwan iti shabdyate. Those who are actually knowers of the absolute truth know that the self is realized in three different phases as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagwan. Bhagwan is the last word in the realization of the absolute truth. Therefore, one should reach up to the platform of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead and thus engage in devotional service of the Lord. That is the perfection of knowledge. Beginning from practicing humility up to the point of realization of the supreme truth, the absolute personality of Godhead, this process is just like a staircase, beginning from the ground floor and going up to the top floor. Now, on this staircase, there are so many people who have reached the first floor, the second or third floor, etc. But unless one reaches the top floor, which is the understanding of Krishna, he is at a lower stage of knowledge. If anyone wants to compete with God and at the same time make advancement in spiritual knowledge, he will be frustrated. It is clearly stated that without humility, understanding is not truly possible. To think oneself God is most puffed up. Although living entity is always being kicked by the stringent laws of material nature, he still thinks I am God because of ignorance. The beginning of knowledge, therefore, is amanitva, humility. One should be humble and know that he is subordinate to the Supreme Lord. Due to rebellion against Supreme Lord, one becomes subordinate to material nature. One must know and be convinced of this truth. ज्ञेयं यत्तत् प्रवक्ष्यामि यज्ञात्वामृतम् अश्नुते अनादिमत्परं ब्रह्म नासत्तन्नासदुच्यते. I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. This is verse 13 of chapter 13, purport by Srila Prabhupada as follows. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. The Lord has explained the field of activities and the knower of the field. He has also explained the process of knowing the knower of the field of activities. Now he begins to explain the knowable, first the soul and then the super soul. By knowledge of the knower, both the soul and super soul, one can relish the nectar of life. As explained in second chapter, the living entity is eternal. This is also confirmed here. There is no specific date at which Jiva was born, nor can anyone trace out the history of the Jivatma's manifestation from the Supreme Lord. Therefore, it is beginningless. The Vedic literature confirms this. Najayate mriyate va vipaschet Katha Upanishad 1-18. The knower of the body is never born and never dies, and he is full of knowledge. In the Supreme Lord as the Super Soul is also stated in the Vedic literature, Shvetashvatar Upanishad 6.16, to be Pradhana Kshetrajna Patir Ganesha, the chief knower of the body and the master of the three modes of material nature. In the Smriti it is said, Das Bhuto Harer Eva Nanya Swayava Kadachan. The living entities are eternally in the service of the Supreme Lord. This is also confirmed by Lord Chaitanya and his teachings. Therefore, the description of Brahman mentioned in this verse is in relation to the individual soul. And when the word Brahman is applied to the living entity, it is to be understood that he is Vijnana Brahma as opposed to Ananda Brahma. Ananda Brahma is Supreme Brahman personality of Godhead. Difficult. Verse 14. Sarvata Pani Padam Tat Sarvato Shikhi Sarvata Panipadam Tat Sarvatokshi Shiromukham Sarvata Shruti Malloke Sarvam Avritya Tishtati. Everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, heads and faces, and he has ears everywhere. In this way, Super Soul exists, pervading everything. Purport. As the sun exists, diffusing its unlimited rays, so does the Super Soul, or Supreme Personality of Godhead. He exists in his all-pervading form, and in him exists all the individual living entities, beginning from the first great teacher Brahma down to the small ants. There are unlimited heads, legs, hands, eyes, and unlimited living entities. All are existing in and on the supersoul. Therefore, the supersoul is all pervading. The individual soul, however, cannot say that he has his hands, legs, and eyes everywhere. That is not possible. If he thinks that under ignorance, he is not conscious that his hands and legs are diffused all over, but when he attains to proper knowledge, he will come to that stage. His thinking is contradictory. This means that the individual soul, having becoming conditioned by material nature, is not supreme. The supreme is different from the individual soul. The Supreme Lord can extend his hand without limit. The individual soul cannot. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that if one offers him a flower or a fruit or a little water, he accepts it. If the Lord is a far distance away, how can he accept things? This is the omnipotence of the Lord. Even though he is situated in his own abode, far, far away from earth, he can extend his hand to accept what anyone offers. That is his potency. In the Brahma Samhita 5.37, it is said, Golok eva nivasatya khilatma bhuto. Although he is always engaged in pastimes in his transcendental planet, he is all pervading. The individual soul cannot claim that he is all pervading. Therefore, this verse describes the Supreme Soul, the personality of Godhead, not the individual soul. Sarvendriya guna bhasham, sarvendriya vivarjitam, asaktam sarvabhrishchaiva, nirgunam gunabhoktra cha. The Supersoul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of material nature, and at the same time, he is the master of all the modes of material nature. Purport. The Supreme Lord, although the source of all the senses of the living entities, doesn't have material senses like they have. Actually, the individual souls have spiritual senses, but in conditioned life, they are covered with the material elements. And therefore, the sense activities are exhibited through matter. The Supreme Lord's senses are not so covered. His senses are transcendental and are therefore called nirguna. Guna means the material modes, but his senses are without material covering. It should be understood that his senses are not exactly like ours. Although he is the source of all sensory activities, he has his transcendental senses which are uncontaminated. This is very nicely explained in the Shvetashvatar Upanishad 3.19 in the verse Apani Pado Javano Grahita. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has no hands which are materially contaminated, but he has his hands and accepts whatever sacrifices offered to him. That is the distinction between the conditioned soul and the super soul. He has no material eyes, but he has eyes. Otherwise, how could he see? He sees everything, past, present, and future. He lives within the heart of all the living beings, and he knows what we have done in the past, what we are doing now, and what is awaiting us in the future. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. He knows everything, but no one knows him. It is said that the Supreme Lord has no legs like us, but he can travel through space because he has spiritual legs. In other words, the Lord is not impersonal. He has his eyes, legs, hands, and everything else. And because we are part and parcel of Supreme Lord, we also have these things. But his hands, legs, eyes, and senses are not contaminated by material nature. Bhagavad Gita also confirms that when the Lord appears, he appears as he is by his internal potency. He is not contaminated by his external potency, that is the material energy, because he is the Lord of material energy. In the Vedic literature, we find that his whole embodiment is spiritual. He has eternal form called Satchid Ananda Vigraha. He is full of all opulence. He is the proprietor of all wealth and owner of all energy. He is the most intelligent and is full of knowledge. These are some of the symptoms of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is the maintainer of all living entities and the witness of all activity. As far as we can understand from Vedic literature, the Supreme Lord is always transcendental. Although we do not see this, his head, face, hands, or legs, he has them. And when we are elevated to the transcendental situation, we can see the Lord's form. Due to materially contaminated senses, we cannot see his form. Therefore, the impersonalists who are still materially affected cannot understand the personality of Godhead. Verse 16. बहिरन्तश्च भूतानाम् अचरं चरमेव च सूक्ष्मत्वत्तद् अविज्ञेयं दूरस्थं चान्तिके च तत्. Translation. The supreme truth exists outside and inside of all living beings, the moving and non-moving, because he is subtle. He is beyond the power of the material senses to see or to know. Although far, far away, he is also near to all. Purport. In the Vedic literature, we understand that Narayan, the Supreme Person, is residing both outside and inside of every living entity. He is present in both the spiritual and material worlds. Although he is far, far away, still he is near to us. There are statements of Vedic literature. These are the statements of Vedic literature. Asino dunam vrajati shaino yati sarvataha. Katha Upanishad 1:221. And because he is always engaged in transcendental bliss, we cannot understand how he is enjoying his full opulence. We cannot see or understand with these material senses. Therefore, in the Vedic language, it is said that to understand him or our material mind and senses cannot act. But one who has purified his mind and senses by practicing Krishna consciousness in devotional service can see him constantly. It is confirmed in Brahma Samhita that the devotee who has developed love for the Supreme God can see him always without cessation. And it is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 11:54 that he can be seen and understood only by devotional service. Bhaktyatva anyaya sakhya. Text 17. अविभक्तं च भूतेषु विभक्तमिव च स्थितं भूतभृच्च ज्ञेयं ग्रासिष्णु प्रभविष्णु च. Although the super soul appears to be divided among all beings, he is never divided. He is situated as one. Although he is the maintainer of every living entity, it is to be understood that he devours and develops all. Purport. The Lord is situated in everyone's heart as the super soul. Does this mean he has become divided? No. Actually, he is one. The example is given of the sun. The sun at the meridian is situated in its place. But if one goes for 5,000 miles in all directions and asks, where is the sun? Everyone will say that it is shining on his head. In the Vedic literature, this example is given to show that although he is undivided, he is situated as if divided. Also, it is said in Vedic literature that one Vishnu is present everywhere by his omnipotence, just as the sun appears in many places to many persons. And the Supreme Lord, although the maintainer of every living entity, devours everything at the time of annihilation. This was confirmed in the 11th chapter when the Lord said that he had come to devour all the various warriors assembled at Kurukshetra. He also mentioned that in the form of time he devours also. He is the annihilator, the killer of all. When there is creation, he develops all from their original state, and at the time of annihilation, he devours them. The Vedic hymns confirm that the fact that he is the origin of all living entities and the rest of all. After creation, everything rests on his omnipotence, and after annihilation, everything again returns to rest in him. These are the confirmations of Vedic hymns. Yato va imani bhutani jayante yena jatani jivanti yat prayantya abhisham vishanti tad brahma tad vijnanashasva. Tiriya Upanishad 3.1. Verse 18. ज्योतिषामपि तज्ज्योतिष्तमसः परमुच्यते ज्ञानं ज्ञेयं ज्ञानगम्यं हृदि सर्वस्य विस्थितम्. Translation. He is the source of light in all luminous objects. He is beyond the darkness of matter and is unmanifested. He is knowledge. He is the object of knowledge, and he is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart. Purport. The super soul, the supreme personality of Godhead, is the source of light in all luminous objects like the sun, moon, and stars. In the Vedic literature, we find that in the spiritual kingdom, there is no need of sun or moon because the effulgence of Supreme Lord is there. In the material world, that Brahma Jyoti, the Lord's spiritual effulgence, is covered by Mahat Tattva, the material elements. Therefore, in this material world, we require the assistance of sun, moon, electricity, etc. for light. But in spiritual world, there is no need of such things. It is clearly stated in the Vedic literature that because of his luminous effulgence, everything is illuminated. It is clear, therefore, that his situation is not in the material world. He is situated in the spiritual world, which is far, far away in the spiritual sky. That is also confirmed in Vedic literature. Aditya Varnam Tamasha Parastat Shvetavasvatara Upanishad 3.8. He is just like the sun, eternally luminous, but he is far, far beyond the darkness of his material world. His knowledge is transcendental. The Vedic literature confirms that Brahman is concentrated, transcendental knowledge. To one who is anxious to be transferred to that spiritual world, knowledge is given by the Supreme Lord who is situated in everyone's heart. One Vedic mantra, Shvetashvatar Upanishad 6.18 says, Tam ha devam atma buddhi prakasham mumukshurva sharanam maham prapadye. One must surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead if he at all wants liberation. As far as the goal of ultimate knowledge is concerned, it is also confirmed in Vedic literature. Tam eva vidivati mrityumiti. Only by knowing him can one surpass the boundary of birth and death. Shvetashvatar Upanishad 3.8. He is situated in everyone's heart as the supreme controller. The supreme has legs and hands distributed everywhere, and this cannot be said for the individual soul. Therefore, that there are two knowers of the field of activity, the individual soul and the super soul, must be admitted. One's hands and legs are distributed locally, but Krishna's hands and legs are distributed everywhere. This is confirmed by Shvetashvatar Upanishad 3.17. Sarvasya Prabhum Ishanam Sarvasya Sharanam Brihat. That Supreme Personality of Godhead, Super Soul, is the Prabhu or Master of all living entities. Therefore, he is the ultimate shelter of all living entities. So there is no denying the fact that the Supreme Super Soul and the individual soul are always different. Verse 19. Iti kshetram tatha jnanam gyeyam choktam samasata madbhakta etad vijnaya madbhavayopapadyate. Translation. Thus the field of activities, the body, knowledge, and the knowable have been summarily described by me. Only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain to my nature. Purport. The Lord has described in summary the body, knowledge, and knowable. This knowledge is of three kinds, three things: the knower, the knowable, and the process of knowing. Combined, these are called Vijnana, or the science of knowledge. Perfect knowledge can be understood by the unalloyed devotees of the Lord directly. Others are unable to understand. The monists say that at the ultimate stage, these three items become one, but the devotees do not accept this. Knowledge and development of knowledge means understanding oneself in Krishna consciousness. We are being led by material consciousness, but as soon as we transfer all consciousness to Krishna's activities and realize that Krishna is everything, then we attain real knowledge. In other words, knowledge is nothing but the preliminary stage of understanding devotional service perfectly. In the 15th chapter, this will be very clearly explained. Now to summarize, one may understand that the verse 6 and 7, beginning from Mahabhutani and continuing through Chaitanya Dhriti, analyze the material elements and certain manifestations of the symptoms of life. These combine to form the body or the field of activities. And verse 8 through 12 from Amanitvam through Tattvagyanartha Darshanam describe the process of knowledge for understanding both types of knower of the field of activities, namely the soul and the supersoul. Then verse 13 through 18, beginning from Anadi Mat Param and continuing through Hirdi Sarvasya Vishthitam, describe the soul and the Supreme Lord or the supersoul. Thus, three items have been described: the field of activity, which is the body, the process of understanding, and both soul and supersoul. It is especially described here that only the unalloyed devotees of the Lord can understand these three things clearly. So, for these devotees, Bhagavad Gita is fully useful. It is they who can attain the supreme goal, the nature of Supreme Lord Krishna. In other words, only devotees and not others can understand Bhagavad Gita and derive desired results. Hare Krishna. We will stop here. We'll continue from verse 20.